Thank you very much for joining us here at the Asia Society for these screenings. These films will be screened again, we hope, in different forms in the near future. You're a very lucky audience to get to see them this early. I'd like to begin by asking you, Siyi, that's a remarkably up-close and intense look at an emergency room. You get to see some brutal injuries and some incredible tenderness exhibited by the caretakers. And you are not in the film at all. Mm-hmm. You're just the eye. You walk us in, we get to observe it as though we are a fly on the wall. Mm-hmm. How did you manage to achieve that effect, and how did you get access to this incredible story?
Mm-hmm. It's definitely pretty intense, but now I look at the footage. I finished the film like last year, and then this version, now I look at the film, I definitely want to do more blood control, and like at the beginning, and then a lot of different ideas. But back to the question, I got access, let's say, because of some family connection. It's extremely hard to go inside a Chinese hospital. And then just one note, if you notice anything about where this hospital is, I would appreciate it if you don't make it public. Just still, because one more thing, I'm still shooting in the hospital to make that into a longer feature, because I feel like for myself, a lot of questions were not answered either. And then in terms of the format, I went in and then I knew I wanted to do a story about this issue, but I wasn't exactly sure like how to tell it at that time. But I know like I like to observe, and then I wanted to, and I like a lot of verite films, so I just want to try to bring my camera in and then present the viewers like things that I saw, like a very raw look into the people in the space, in that particular space.
Briefly, Dr. Li, in the middle of the film, describes a phenomenon that's happening in China where a lot of doctors are subject to violence by patients who come into the hospitals and are frustrated with service. Mm-hmm. Was that something that your family connection had any experience with?
Yeah. One of the like most direct reason why I want to make this film is because my mom's a doctor. That's why you see I attribute the film to my mom at the end. And then there were like almost all the doctors I talked to, they had some trauma, small, big. The woman you saw at the beginning, she got a slap on the face by a patient. And this is a big issue in China. If you look up, a lot of the articles in China talks about this violence. And then so I remember when I was very young, and then about 6, 7 years old, my mom went home crying, and then that was the first time I saw her cry, because she's pretty tough, like a female doctor. And then she told me the reason why she cried was because she failed to save a patient, and then the family just dragged her into the public and then embarrassed her and smashed her glasses. To her, it was like a big embarrassment. But then so for a long time, I was on the doctor's perspective, because my family's like that. And then I had my first surgery. I think it was a small surgery around like college. And then I was thrown into this room where I was waking up. I was the only one awake, and nobody actually came in and saw me, like asked me what was happening. And my parents were waiting outside. They didn't know what was going on. So then I realized like hospital is not the way I see it as the daughter of a doctor. It seems to be much more like harsh and cold for the patient. So I want to see this gap and then see how the two different groups feel about this space and how that gap sort of affect their experience there.
Remarkable. Thank you. April, if you could tell us where you grew up and whether you had exposure to Tibetan students and colleagues and classmates when you were a child, and perhaps explain your motivation in choosing this as a topic.
I was born in a small town in China, but I grew up in Shanghai. And it's interesting that I have there's this Tibetan boarding school right across the street of my house, but I had no idea it was a Tibetan boarding school. So it was really weird when I go to college, and I made a few friends, Tibetan friends in college in Shanghai, and they told me that, oh, you know what, I graduated from that school. I lived in Shanghai for almost a decade. It was a big surprise to me, because I never realized there was this group of people, they're receiving the same education like me, but they speak a different language. They came from miles away in Tibet, and their families were miles away. So that's my initial motivation, just to know them. And I have the opportunity to travel outside the country, and when I was doing that, I was exposed to a lot of different Western values, so to speak, and Western media coverage about it, Chinese issues. And Tibet-China relationship is one of those issues. And it was totally different from what I've been told in school while I was in China. So I just wanted to know who is right or wrong, or which sort of press coverage is biased, which one is not. Well, it turns out that both are biased in some way, but the most thing is that you don't hear a lot of voices from the Tibetans who are living in mainland China or currently living in Tibet. You can hear voices from the Tibetans who are in exile. So that's the second reason I want to get an access to this unique group, because they're pretty much silent in a way.
And speaking of giving voice to those students, you do a remarkable job. You are in your film. We hear your voice. I was particularly fond of your close conversations with the young women. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and when I get to be a fly on the wall with her and her friends, that kind of intimate conversation is often hard to come by if they know I'm in the room. But you take us right in there, and they're extremely candid about their religious faith, their relationship to the Communist Party. Did it take a while for you to gain the trust so that they would feel comfortable with you pointing a camera at them and asking those questions?
Well, when I initially trying to get access to the school, I was told that there's a lot of things that I'm not allowed to film on campus. And there's a lot of parameters, and the school principal were just, they're very straightforward in telling me that, you know what, the thing that we're letting you do is we're taking a risk here. And, it's a very sensitive subject, so you gotta be very careful. And you cannot film this or that. So, I abide those rules when I was filming. So what
sort of things did they say you couldn't film?
There are a lot of things. A lot of the things that, especially when it comes from certain occasion when there is a government official drop by, I cannot film that. Yes, pretty much like that. And so when I'm doing the interviews, I just think that maybe when I'm interviewing the teachers, I probably cannot ask those questions, the question that I ask to the students. But when I'm dealing with the students, it's surprisingly, they're kids, so they see me as one of their friends. They're in a very intense school environment, and I bring in my camera and play with them in a classroom. So they just feel like I'm their little sister, their big sister. So it was easier to talk to them. And once I figured out it's easier to talk to the kids, I started to ask questions that I really wanted to ask, only to the kids.
It seems to me that you spent a long time with them. Now they go in when they're 12 or 13 years old, and we know that. But what age did you meet them? What stage were they in their 3-year?
Right, I started to film them last May.
Okay.
So it was only 3 months I'm with them, and so it was not a long time period, but I guess they sort of, I sort of get them, because I was in school once, and what they are fond of, what their interests are, it was easy to talk to the kids and to bond with them.
So maybe we will soon see the first Tibetan K-pop star.
Probably. She's really talented.
Remarkable detail there. Siyi, I want to turn back to you and ask you about one theme that came out on a couple of levels in the emergency room, and that's a sort of superstition and karma. We see some of the bystanders observing. Sometimes it's the nurses, sometimes it's the ambulance driver and other patients talking about the fate of these patients. What might they have done to deserve this fate? Why did the boy drown? His mother had broken the one-child policy. What did Mr. Kang do in his previous life? This comes out. Did you, at any stage, it appears to me that you're just observing this,
Right.
but did you at any stage in the filmmaking process ask questions to prompt some of what we're observing?
I don't remember I asked questions. 'Cause I actually didn't really think about this theme when I was making the film, but I included the last story, and because I just feel like there's something, maybe it doesn't fit the motive or the theme that I set out to look for, like the relationship between doctors and patients, but it provides a different kind of sphere or like to their relationship. And like I think this is universal, like hospitals are strange places because you get to see, I'm sure it's the same in the US or any countries, because you get to see slices of other people's life, and it always feels like it's not just you see, there's something more to it, like they're making life and death decisions like within a few seconds. So it's a very dramatic place. And then a lot of the universal themes, like I mentioned, like life and death, and then your belief come up, or love, and then these are the general themes.
Yeah, we get to see the devil cast out right on screen. It's amazing.
Yeah. So that was the thing that also like attracted me besides the issue. So like what we see in this space about ourselves, and then like I was filming this little kid who thought his grandfather was drunk, and then I got attracted to him. Not because like I knew what I was looking for him, just because he reminds me of when I was 7, and then I didn't know what was going on, and then one of a very important family member died of an accident, and then a lot of the adults, they were like scrambled, and they're like, like it's a devastating situation. But I was so young, I didn't know what was going on. So that sort of situation reminded me a lot of my own experience. And that was the instinct, so I just go after the stories that I felt would resonate with me and maybe others too.
April, do you have hope that someday your film, One Way Home, might screen in China?
Before I go back to film, I had the hope. And once the film is constructed in an editing room, and I just step back and take a look at it, I feel like the chances, the odds are really small. Actually, after the NYU inner screening, the film festival at NYU, the 2 Tibetan kids who are currently studying abroad approached me, and they only saw the trailer of the film. They have never seen the whole film, but they expressed great concern about this film being shown in inland China, because they feel like it would somehow put their fellow Tibetan kids in danger. And I gotta say, it's a very legit concern. And although that I believe my depiction of the school, the boarding school, is not biased, I think it's pretty legit, but I still think the nature of this subject is the minority policy in China. Overall, it's just sensitive. It's touchy, and the government does not want to watch films like this in any sort of platform. So I was hoping that maybe someday, if it is possible, I can screen the film in mainland China. That would mean that, it's a different situation, status quo there.
Turn to Professor Marcia Rock. Thank you for bringing us this talent.
I'm so proud of you.
I want to ask you about your program at NYU. When did you first have students from China? How many have there been since they first arrived? And what have you learned from the perspective that they bring, perhaps not having grown up with a similar documentary tradition that we are blessed with here in the US?
So maybe I started having Chinese students 8 to 10 years ago. And it was wonderful because they knew about things I didn't know about and had never seen. Because of the limited freedom of documentary producers in China, they could go to places that usually you don't see. So we went to tiny villages, we went to big cities, topics about the Cultural Revolution, and I'm just constantly fascinated at the topics my students choose, because it's partly their exploration. So Siyi would be about an experience she lived as a child, and then is understanding as an adult. But April, was fascinated by this education of Tibetan students, and I thought with an extremely open mind and amazing ability to get access, did this story, and she opened all of this up for us as well. And we keep traveling all over these hidden places in China that you would never ever travel to, and learn about the disappearing villages, food issues, and I have a Tibetan student now who's going to take us to the nomadic areas. So China's such a rich place to discover, uncover, create stories, because people haven't been telling those stories much in our style of storytelling. And that's the other interesting thing about, I think, the program, is that we encourage this immersive kind of journalism where you really stay with a topic for a long period of time, 2 to 3 months, and really get to know it and really see the people through the lens. And I think that's what distinguishes the work of our students from others. We don't really encourage the voice of God narration, although we do love when there is a narration, so it's not like we only like verite style. But we really teach them to see through the camera and to really study what's going on. And I think you can see that through the visual style.
Question for the students here, the filmmakers. What was the most shocking and surprising guidance you got from your teacher?
So many of them.
Well,
Was there any point where you just said, no, I can't do that?
It was definitely stressful in the first semester. It was so stressful I could not fall asleep at night, and I constantly thinking of how to construct a story. I think the first assignment was for us, well, it was easy to do a postcard shot, and then it gets really hard, and you started to, I consider myself a print journalist before I go to NYU, and then all of a sudden I have to use the camera and start to shooting, and I have to make a video story by myself. It was really hard, and I wrote my first script ever, and I turned into Marcia, and there's just so many red marks on it. And I totally broke down, and it was just it was a very stressful experience. But I gotta say, through the whole process of going out on a hunt for a story and filming them, and then gather all your footage together and started to construct a story in your editing room, and you discuss it with professor, with your classmates. The whole process of it is really a fast learning process for you to really immerse yourself into video storytelling. And you learn really fast in this process, and you get really pretty good at it at the end of the second semester. And then you're ready, and you go to other places in the world, and you start to make your own film. So it was a really amazing experience. It's a quite amazing journey.
Thank you.
I can think of one thing. I don't know if it's Marcia said that or another professor, but that was one line that stuck with me, and I always thought of when I was filming. It was the thing that you feel least comfortable filming is probably the most valuable thing of the story, because still I think of the question, like, as a filmmaker, it always feels like a little voyeuristic because you're making art out of other people's life. So, like, how do you find peace with that? How do you make sure you have the responsibility to give them, like, a fair presentation of their life? So, like, that's a constant struggle. So, like, do I put down the camera and then, or do I keep filming? And then, so that was extremely hard, I think, especially for this situation.
Can I say something?
Please.
So what distinguishes our program also is that each student shoots and edits their own piece. So they're out there on their own, and that doesn't attract certain types of people, but it does attract people who really are passionate about a story and wants the freedom to just go and do it. So it has a very distinct style because of that.
I'd like to invite all of you in the audience to ask questions of our filmmakers and Professor Rock. If you have a microphone, which will be passed to you by my colleagues, please identify yourself and direct your question to one of our panelists, please.
Hi, my name's Peter Crosby. Excuse me. Loved the two films. Two questions. One is there's sort of connective tissue between both of them around religion. And religion is such a sensitive topic in China. You talked about the likelihood of your films being screened in China. Is there any risk for you as filmmakers and your family with regards to these topics? Because you're touching on very sensitive issues.
This question for me, right?
For both of you.
When I was filming it, I get really suspicious. I constantly back up my footage, and I was just making sure that, I don't cross any line to make anybody alert of what I was doing back then. And it turns out to be okay, and I get the access to the story, and the teachers overall and the school overall are very cooperative. So I would say that the filming process is not dangerous to me. Now that I made this film, and I feel like the film is okay. It's mostly a discussion of a cultural conflict. But I was told by a lot of people that this is going to be a problem for you. I don't know. I have very mixed feeling about this. I'm still trying to make this film more on a more cultural conversation, not a political one. But as you can see, I cannot, not speaking of the elephant in the room, because the school is, there's this big political agenda behind it. So, what's the question again? Right. So, yeah, I hope there won't be any personal risk for me or my family, because I'm hoping to go back to film more stories in China, because there are a lot of hidden story, in China that I think it's important for journalists to lift the veil away from them. But we'll see. Right now, it's not very open-minded time right now for China, but things will change, hopefully.
I think my answer is I don't know, actually. There is always risk. Like, I remember I saw this article about this new law passed in March. So technically, any Chinese filmmakers making film in China has to get this longbiao, which is like an approval from the government to screen overseas. Technically, if you don't do that, then you're breaking the law. And so there is, I don't know if that would motivate more Chinese to get the approval, or is there any way to work around it? But I've heard stories like directors, they had to escape the country for a few months, but they're still alive and they came back. So the truth is, I really don't know where the line is. I don't know where the line is, and then that's a scary thing, because a lot of I've seen similar stuff like screen in China about Chinese hospitals, but probably not as direct and as raw as my film. So I think what's scary is I really don't know.
Yeah, the thing is that there's no guideline, like a white paper or a book that shows you what can you or can't you do. Yeah. So that's it was very hard for us to try to do stuff we want to do and satisfy the government as well.
A little background on that question. I was a reporter in Beijing for 8 years up until 2013, and in 2012 I was covering the Beijing Independent Film Festival for the New York Times, when about 5 minutes into a documentary the police showed up and pulled the plug on not just the screening room electricity but the entire village. They didn't want it to be screened anywhere, and the film, which was made by a student of Li Xianting, who runs a documentary workshop outside Beijing, was later screened in his office off of a generator. And it was a film shot on a handy-cam, young student going back to her village, interviewing her grandparents about the famines. So, again, difficult to know where the line is. Mm-hmm. Other questions, please? There in the back with your hand raised. Yeah, thank you.
My question is for April.
Could you identify yourself, please?
Sure. I'm Tenzing. I'm a Tibetan that grew up in exile, and it was interesting that you said that there were Tibetans that raised the same question. When I saw the scene with the girls talking so candidly with you, I was also very concerned about them, and I was wondering if you had a discussion with them about the fact that that conversation would be a part of a larger film that would be shown across the globe. And also if you had the opportunity to talk to the parents about the film. Because it seems like these kids were so dedicated and determined to have a job in the government. And I wonder if that could in any way jeopardize that, because there have been a lot of occasions where Tibetans have been either arrested or detained for films that they've been featured in.
I realized that I was really honest with them when I was making the film. I told them that I'm making a documentary, so if I ask any questions that you guys don't want to answer, you don't have to, because I'm filming all the time, and they know I'm filming. So I guess for the kids, their candidacy is a surprise to me. But at the same time, I was wondering if it's possible that the environment of the school is changing so that allows them to talk freely to me. That was I believe that people would think that a lot of things we show in the film could encourage imprisonment, but the truth is when the girls speak of they cannot restrict us physically, they can restrict us physically but not mentally, and the other kid was like, they're gonna arrest you for that. They're saying that as a joke. So I don't know. I hope not bad things won't happen to them, but I cannot be sure. But there are certain things that needs to be told and cannot be hidden. I would believe that it would be a wrong thing to do if I choose not to include their answers in the film.
I feel like there's there could be a more responsible way of doing it. Like, I think it's really great that you're highlighting these issues. I know I think about these kinds of schools, and you're definitely right. The issue should not be hidden at all. But I feel like there's a way to do it, and it's very difficult.
Yes. So that's why I'm trying, still editing the film, and if people can see that the topic I'm discussing in the film is not purely a political agenda, it's more of a cultural conflict, and the girls they're expressing their reasonable concern about their language disappearing. I believe it could be understandable by the government. I think that your concern is pretty legit, and but what can you do about it?
Can we have another question here on the aisle? Thank you.
Question for Siyi.
Could you identify yourself?
Oh, my name is Glenn Fennelly. Remarkable films, both of you. I learned so much about the Chinese medical system. I've traveled there with my wife, and I've been in hospitals. I'm a physician myself. One thing that caused me discomfort is by U.S. standards, the HIPAA rules. If I were as much as to snap a picture of a patient and put it up on social media, I could potentially be fined, lose my license. So there was that degree of discomfort for me watching this. Again, a similar question, did these patients give consent and the families give consent? Another aspect is that there's something called the EMTALA laws in the U.S., Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. For a physician or a hospital to refuse treatment or put payment before treatment would result in an automatic $50,000 fine for the doctor and for the hospital. So what I think I'm learning here is a harsh reality that what sustains the doctors may be part of the profiteering through the drugs. But in any case, I just would like to hear a bit more from you in terms of your responses to those.
Mm-hmm. First question, I don't think there is, China has like a privacy law. So, and then my approach is just to get informal, like on-camera release, because in a very chaotic situation, and also Chinese don't have, most Chinese don't have the habit of signing things, and then so that would scare them a lot, and then that's and also like the emergency room I filmed is a little weird because it's sort of a public place. There's no gate there, and anyone can just walk in. So it's a little hard for me too. And then I would put up release somewhere, hope it helps, and then for the major stories, if I'm showing their face up close, then I would talk to them and see if they're okay with that. And the second question is, I sort of missed that.
Just to clarify, if these doctors were refusing treatment, they were asking for payment before they gave treatment. By U.S. standards, that would result in a $50,000 fine, potential loss of license for a physician. So watching this movie with those standards, granted there are limitations in what China can deliver to so many people, but it's just something I just encourage you to be aware of as well.
Oh, yeah. This is actually a situation that I should have explained, but it was a little hard because in China you pay up front to get treatment. You don't get treatment and then maybe get bills and get reimbursed. This is just how everything works. But let's say if you're covered by insurance, then you pay a portion of the thing because the insurance already is deducted from the bill they give you. It's just a system. It's been there for a long time.
And medication, right? They have to pay for that before they can receive it.
Yeah, the way, this is why I want to make a longer version because it's so complicated. The way you get treatment in China, you get a ticket. You first get a ticket to see a doctor. You can't just walk in, like some people just walked in, and that's why a lot of doctors got annoyed. And so you get a ticket to see a doctor. And then once the doctor sees you, and then he prescribes, or he or she prescribes, and then you take the prescription to pay, and then you get whatever exam or medicines you want. For emergency room, it's still the same, but there are special situations. Let's say this Miss Khan, he doesn't have family, he doesn't have money, so doctors will have to file paperwork and say, this is an extreme situation. We'll have to, it is required by law that they can reject and turn away any patient who walks in an emergency room.
So you really need to go in with a friend or a family member in order to get treatment.
Yeah. I mean, you still get treatment if you're like unconscious, and then if you really need it, or if in an urgent situation, they would pay for it. The hospital would cover it first, but they would hope somebody would pay for the bill afterwards. But that's just, yeah.
There in the middle, the white shirt, yeah.
Hi, my name is Jennifer. Thank you for the great movies. My question is for April, but I want to comment on Siyi's film first. I just attended a conference last week about healthcare. I think your film delivered a very clear message, no matter we are focusing on the relationship between doctors and patients and the staffed environment, and doctors are forced to some injuries. But the message is very clear that healthcare spending only accounts for 5% of GDP in China, while compared to the world average of 10%. So, April, I have been living in China, Shanghai, for over 20 years. I never know there is such a school dedicated for Tibet students. So thank you for letting us know. But what is the message you want to deliver through that documentary? I didn't get it. If you can just kind of elaborate.
Well, I was just, I feel like China is a country with a different culture and different people, ethnic groups. They compose the whole China. And I believe the beauty of the Chinese culture is that it's so diverse. And I've been seeing that the language of a minority group are, a lot of the languages of minority groups are disappearing. And my main motivation to do this film, mostly, one first is to give exclusive access to this group that people don't really know about. And secondly is to raise this attention that their language, their culture, their religion are disappearing because of the education they're receiving. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sort of, because there is a clip about girls from Canada. They're talking about they want to learn the language, but they feel like they cannot translate bad words into that. But I feel like if it's that what you want to achieve, you might want to elaborate that part a little more about to deliver the message even more clear. I mean, I'm just talking as an amateur. I'm from a business
No, that makes
background,
sense. Yeah.
and a arts or news background.
There's a remarkable coincidence. I don't know if anybody else caught it, but Tashi, the boy student, is at one point wearing a T-shirt with a picture of a dinosaur, and it says "died
Die
out."
out. That's really funny.
If anybody caught that out, it was just sort of amazing detail. You didn't give him the T-shirt, did you?
No.
We have time for one last question. Who is the lucky winner? Here with the beard, please.
My name is Dominic Wong.
Could you wait for the microphone, please? Thank you.
My name is Dominic Wong. I appreciate both film and I really enjoy it. My question is maybe for the professor and also for student. And in terms of working in a very sensitive area with a lot of subject, like where you don't have the guideline, how would a student approach what to tell, what not, and how do you decide what to do? You know, when you come back, like even though just now a student expressed a concern, which is my concern as well, is get to a very sensitive area and it's shown to the public, like, you know, what is the responsibility as a filmmaker?
I think you try to be as fair as possible and take into consideration the parameters that you're up against, but you also want to tell the story. So I think April will be very sensitive about where she shows it and how she contextualizes the screenings. I do think she's expanding it, so what you mentioned will be expanded on. And this is a slightly shorter version that and I hadn't seen it. And some of the things she cut out, which I know she'll put back in, are the expanded political lesson. So it's very clear. But for me, it's the painful choice of the parents. And for them, it is no choice. you know, they want their children to have this education and to be leaders and to make money. And they are not so concerned about losing their culture. But it's interesting that the children are very sensitive to that and conflicted about it. And I think that's quite a beautiful story. They want to get ahead. They can't be entrepreneurs. They don't have any backing to do that, to do it on their own. This is really the one way forward. And yet it's at a huge cultural price.
Does either of you have a last comment?
Yeah, this is actually something I've been thinking about. Like, I made this as a student film. I was a little like clueless when I went in there, and then I've been thinking about the approach because I'm showing very sensitive and private stuff. So, and then, but one good way to do it is like I keep contacts of some of the people I filmed. Like I also went to actually a church event with the couple at the end of the film. So I feel like, and then this film wasn't intended for a very wide distribution. It was a student project. But as I make the longer film, I think I will be having conversations with them and then see how comfortable they are with what kind of audience. And then, like, I do want to show this film in China in some way at some point. And then I feel like that's even more for them to consider, especially for the doctors and patients, because that's more like direct impact on them.
I'm not so sure in what way I will be expanding the film, but I do want to delve more into the subject. And I've been in touch with the students and the main two characters in my film. So in a way that I think it would be fair for me to follow them throughout the years and to see their changes. This Yuju really get to become a K-pop star. This Tashi, fulfilled his dream and his mother's wish to go to college in mainland China. I mean, in the end, when you're making a film, it's not really about the message you want to come across. It's not really about cultural conflicts, not really about a political agenda. It's more about a human being and how he lives and how he or she lives in this world. And we can all resonate with that. And that's the story I really want to tell.
That is a lovely message to end on. I want to thank you both and Marcia for bringing us this little window into subjects that we might not otherwise have had a chance to see. Very well done. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming here to Asia Society tonight. We encourage you to stay engaged, come to future events, and read ChinaFile.com, the magazine where we do long-form, non-profit storytelling in slightly shorter versions than the films we've seen tonight. So thanks again, and please come back. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's really a pleasure.